Great. Okay, so today we've got a briefing in the first hour from our Austin Energy staff, and just to kind of center us here, because we have a lot of ground to cover. Today is going to be the first of several meetings focused on Austin Energy as well as other issues. But today, the piece that we're looking at today from Austin Energy, the first in a series of several meetings over the coming months to cover all the issues that we want to cover related to the February winter storm. Today, for the Austin Energy portion, we just have an hour from 1 to 2. The Austin Water Utility Oversight Committee was generous enough to share the first portion of their regularly scheduled meeting with us, which is how we got this nice joint meeting. The second series of this, the second meeting of this series will again be a joint one with the Austin Water Utility Oversight Committee on March 31, which is the regularly scheduled Austin Energy Oversight Committee meeting. In that meeting series context, I'd like us all to be thinking as our conversation can be framed as how it started, how it's going, and what's ahead. This will help us in our review in the months ahead to examine lessons learned and determine the best path forward for improvements, because all of us here at the City of Austin are committed to best practices and constant improvements mindset for our professional, the services that we provide at a professional level to the City of Austin. And given the amount of time we have for this first meeting, I thought it'd be helpful to start with some foundational information from Austin Energy leadership about the utility, and then they will present us, included in this presentation will be a broad timeline of the storm events. We'll also talk about how Austin Energy communicated with the public and its customers today, and then close with, if we have time, with a listing of the various relief opportunities that Austin Energy has crafted, along with the other things that the city is doing in support of the residents who are without power and other services for that period from February 11 till about February 18. I wanted to ask my vice chair, Councilmember Tovo, to make some opening and centering remarks as well, because as you know, the work that we're engaging in is, this is just the opening door for a lot of work that we will be accomplishing in the next few months. Councilmember Tovo.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Poole. So, last week at our council meeting, we passed a measure to create a comprehensive review that would take place at the council, as well as at a community task force, and the IFC that I'll be bringing forward is also going to have a component that is under the auditor's scope. And so, really, the only point I wanted to make today is that as a council, over the next week, I hope we can be in conversation on the council message board about how to structure those conversations. They will certainly include formal discussions about Austin Energy and Austin Water, as well as other elements. Shelter, communication runs through all of them, food distribution, water distribution, other kinds of supply and EOC related items. So what I just wanted to air is that in talking with the mayor, who's going to be a co-sponsor on the IFC, we talked about how we lay out the work plan. And so, Councilmember, I know you said the next conversation would be the 31st, and certainly we can try to work that into the work plan, but it's my hope that when we pass the IFC, we will carve out a calendar that includes a conversation at our work sessions and at our council meetings until the council can kind of work through our whole work plan. I think we need to look at the emergency in a comprehensive way and really be intentional about how we're going to segment out those conversations and which speakers we want to be included in each of those conversations. And so these efforts, I think, will work seamlessly together, but they are, I hope, part of that larger calendar of how we're going to undertake the review. So just to underscore something you said, I think it's important to convey to the public that this is a piece of the conversation, but only the beginning of the conversation, and that we are hoping to undertake it in a comprehensive way, as well as to have the community task force really hear directly from the public and have our auditor look more closely at certain elements of it in a more intensive way as well.
Thank you for that, Councilmember Tova. That sounds great. I look forward to working with you on what that structure looks like. I do know that our Austin Energy Utility Oversight Committee is a perfect place for us to really, really focus and go laser-like and dig real deep in the ground that is specifically and only Austin Energy, as well as the other stuff we were going to be doing with Austin Energy this year when we were setting out our work plan for 2021. So it sounds like we will have ample time between committee work and focused work plan work that with the IFC that you're bringing to certainly cover all of the areas and also make sure that all our folks and the community have an opportunity to weigh in and give us their input. So I'd like to now invite the General Manager, Jackie Sargent, to come onto the, unmute her mic and give us a presentation. The first part is Texas Power Grid and Austin Energy. The Texas Power Grid is under the state authority, the Public Utility Commission and ERCOT, and we're all familiar with that now over the last 3 weeks. We'll talk about how Austin Energy operates as a municipally owned utility, and the general manager will offer, and her staff will offer a broad timeline of the storm events and the communications that were issued from the utility and talk all that through. We'll take some questions at the end of that segment, then we'll move on more specifically to communications and take questions on that portion when that's done, and then hopefully have some time to talk about the relief being offered to our residents. General Manager Sargent.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Committee Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. I'm Jackie Sargent, General Manager of Austin Energy. First, let me say that we at Austin Energy share the frustration that our customers and everyone here feels about what happened during the recent winter storm events. The outage duration, severity, and the inability for us to rotate outages was unacceptable. People suffered, they endured significant hardship. For that, I am truly sorry. We look forward to working with all of you to do a better job of protecting our community from these events in the future. As we review the actions that took place, we will look for opportunities to harden our systems, enhance our response efforts, and improve communications. Our city, our community, and our state must be better prepared for the next severe multi-day weather event. For Austin Energy and our customers, the challenges began with an ice storm on February 11th, before the ERCOT emergency began on February 15th. This storm hit the Austin area harder than the rest of the state, and it hit the northwest part of our service territory particularly hard. This storm was far greater than any of the extreme winter weather scenarios modeled by ERCOT that are used by all electric market participants for planning. No one imagined that we would ever be required to shed so much load so quickly and for so long in order to keep the entire ERCOT grid from collapsing. In 2011, the ERCOT energy emergency lasted only 6 hours, and Austin Energy was required to shed 158 megawatts of customer load. By comparison, starting February 15th, ERCOT directed Austin Energy to shed more than 700 megawatts, 4.5 times more than 2011, and lasting for 3 days. This amount of load shed was so extraordinary that we had no other available circuits to rotate customer outages. Maxed out on available circuits. To rotate outages at that point would have endangered critical loads such as hospitals, communications infrastructure, water treatment plants, and public safety facilities. Austin Energy worked with ERCOT and the PUC to avoid a catastrophic grid failure. Such a failure would have required weeks and potentially longer to restore power to all customers in the ERCOT grid. Following the initiation of the ERCOT emergency, a second winter storm brought even more freezing rain, ice, and snow that continued for 3 more days. Austin Energy worked tirelessly to restore power outages for customers in dangerous weather conditions. As we get into the details of everything that happened, you may hear us talk a lot about the technical side of things, but I want to make it clear that how we carry out our functions or how ERCOT works is not meant to deflect or to obscure our duty of care and compassion for people and to make sure our customers have electricity. We are public servants and we take our duty to our customers and our community seriously. Now that we have restored our system, we are working to identify how to better meet the needs of all of our customers. As the City Council fulfills its role as Austin Energy's governing body, you have my commitment that we will work toward making improvements for our community. We must work together to find solutions to address this emergency and plan for the future. I would like to close by saying how thankful I am to all utility workers here in Austin and across this state for their heroic efforts. Thank you for working tirelessly, even when faced with your own personal challenges, to restore service to customers. Today, as requested by the committee chair and consideration of the time available, our presentation will focus on the timeline of events and a summary of our communications preceding and during the events. We will touch on customer assistance programs and bill relief measures. And finally, we'll share information regarding policy discussions and regulatory compliance activities. I appreciate that we can't cover everything today and understand that we will have opportunities in the future to address other topics in greater detail. With that, I'll turn it over to Deputy General Manager and Chief Operating Officer Sydney Jackson for an operational overview of the events that transpired. Sydney?
Thank you, General Manager, and good afternoon, council members and city manager. Again, my name is Sydney Jackson. I'm the Deputy General Manager and Chief Operating Officer at Austin Energy. And my objective over the next several minutes is to go over the timeline or major events leading to, during, and after the winter storm or polar vortex that began Thursday, February 11th. And it continued most of the next week or the following days, while also that storm being a significant contributor to the ERCOT grid emergency that resulted in severe emergency load shed. Following my brief remarks, our Director of Communication, Ms. Marissa Monroy, will address our external communications that occurred before, during, and after the electric grid emergency. Next slide, please. The winter storm that impacted Austin was a 100-year storm event. The next slide, please. And that 100-year winter storm affected much of the south central portion of the United States, as we all know. The storm could really be characterized as a continuing storm, and it was unique to Austin geography and was different from other Texas metro areas. The storm was really a wave after wave of storms, leaving snow, ice, freezing rain, and multiple bouts that coated our vegetation in an additive manner. So it was a unique storm event in many ways. Next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit about our emergency preparedness and storm response. Austin Energy was focused on this weather forecast. We knew the potential impact. We had the recent experience of the January 10th and January 11th snow event that occurred the previous month. Our command structure was in place prior to the storm. Our crews were scheduled in anticipation of the storm. In short, we were mobilized to respond. In terms of our strategic preparation, at strategic times, our crews were even sequestered to assure their availability, to include field crews, power plant personnel, control room personnel, all in efforts to assure that we can restore customers and stakeholders as soon as possible. The next slide, please. As this slide shows, the degree of ice formed on vegetation was significant, resulting in numerous outages, as we have communicated previously: falling debris, vegetation contact with power lines, power line sag due to the weight of ice, and moreover, the restoration for our staff and employees in the field was difficult and harsh, as it was conducted in extreme conditions or extreme temperatures, low temperatures as well. Next slide, please. Probably want to spend the bulk of my comments around this slide. This slide speaks to the number of customers outaged at any given time, and it's probably of keen interest to all of you. It's bifurcated into three boxes: the yellow box on the left, the orange box in the middle, and the more dark-colored bluish dark box on the right. Looking at the yellow-orange coated box on the left, it represents outage customers that prior to the ERCOT load shed. That would be Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, essentially the February 11th through the 14th time frame. And as you can see, our peak outage customers was 33,000 due to that Thursday, Friday storm. Again, we're looking at the yellow box only. And that is despite 2 waves of ice and snow that came through the service territory. The restoration during this phase was made particularly difficult due to what we call repeated outages on the same circuit. This was a commonplace occurrence as we had wave after wave of storms come through. So we would restore a circuit and re-energize, only to be faced with a continuing falling debris on the same outage. And in many sense, this could be categorized as rework and rework and rework, just to the degree of the storm, the continuation of the storm, and the precipitation in the form of ice. As you know, our goal is to restore all customers as soon and as safely as possible. And as we crossed into Saturday night into Sunday morning, effectively all our customers were restored. As you can see in the yellow box, as we get to the right end of the yellow box, essentially all our customers were restored. But again, we had continuing storms. And as we approached Sunday going into Monday, we did have re-outages that occur. One, due to the re-outages that I mentioned, and also due to continuing storms. So as we approached the orange box in the middle, and this is where we had the ERCOT event, we were up to approximately 822 customers that transitioned from the yellow box into the ERCOT event. And let's transition into the red box. The red coded box, as I mentioned, represents outage customers during the ERCOT load shed event. So our maximum was 33,000 nominally in the yellow box. As we got into the red box, our maximum customers that were outage due to load shed, manual ERCOT load shed, was 220,000 customers. Obviously, orders of magnitude difference between the yellow and the red box. And again, this is the result of mandatory and severe ERCOT load shed directives. Approximately 44% of our customers, due to emergency grid directives to bring load in line with available generation, and again, at the direction of ERCOT. Many customers often ask, why couldn't Austin Energy communicate when they would be restored? Again, looking at the red box, and during the ERCOT load shed phase, ERCOT as a grid authority issued the directives to Austin Energy to execute those load sheds. During this EEA3 emergency segment, Austin Energy was told how much to shed and when to shed and when to restore, again at the directive of ERCOT. So you can understand, just due to the volatility of customers coming in and out as shown by the graphic, it is very difficult for Austin Energy to have a view of where ERCOT might go. As you know, ERCOT has telemetry to most every generation facility or transmission facility in the state of Texas. ERCOT has the system, the statewide vantage point, and the charter authorization as well, and they make those directives based on that. Austin Energy does not have that breadth of view. As you know, our mandate was to execute rotating outages during the ERCOT load shed event, and as our general manager has previously communicated, Our systems were standing by. Our systems were at the ready to execute rotating outages. But as you heard, the depth of the load shed curtailments was so severe that to execute an outage rotation would have had, one, potential compromise to critical loads such as police, fire, emergency responders, or potentially have diminishing returns due to cold load pickup or an inrush. Essentially, picking up cold load that has not had the diversity can result at times up to 3 times the sustained load versus a singular load that was warm and essentially had heating diversity on it. Again, looking at the red box, as you look to the back end of the red box, fortunately, towards the back end of that time period, ERCOT, while still in EEA3, their highest level of emergency, was allowing restoration at their directive. And Austin Energy complied with that directive as quickly as possible to restore load. As the greenish box on the right indicates, much of that is the restoration phase, and that occurred Thursday, Friday, and Saturday timeframe, essentially February 18th, 19th, and 20th. Austin Energy restored greater than 99% of our customers Saturday, February 20th, around 12 noon, and that was in part aided by favorable weather. So those 3 transition boxes are an attempt to describe the timeline, describe the severity, and describe the administrative issues that were going on simultaneously during those periods. Next slide, please. This next timeline kind of has a bit of a different emphasis, but very similar. It emphasizes the wave after wave of storms that were occurring, the difficult restoration conditions, the closed traffic corridors, the sustained polar vortex, the below freezing temperatures, and some of the other challenges that I've previously described. Next slide, please. This slide speaks to the unprecedented nature of the near collapse of the electric grid. I'm sure you've heard that. This actually is a graph of the frequency over a 30-minute period. The ideal frequency is 60 hertz, as we're all aware. And I just want to talk about the load shed that occurred over this 30-minute period. Over this 30-minute period, from the left hand of the graph to the right hand of the graph, ERCOT executed 5 separate and distinct load shed directives, all with the purpose of desperately trying to save the electric grid. Obviously, also to arrest frequency collapse as the system frequency was fast decaying. So looking at this graph, all the indications in red are load shed. So at the beginning of the time frame to the left of the graph, 1,000 megawatts was load shed by ERCOT directive at 123. An incremental 1,000 megawatts was shed as you move further to the right. 25 minutes later, and again, the frequency is starting to degrade further. 5 minutes after that, an incremental 3,000 megawatts was load shed, and you can see the frequency is degrading further at a dangerously low almost 59.3 hertz. Again, our target is 60 hertz. And then 4 minutes later, an incremental 3,500 megawatts of load shed again. And then 7 minutes later, the 5th load shed event inside this 30-minute window of an incremental 2,000 megawatts. This shows how dire this situation was, and these load sheds events needed to arrest frequency decay. Austin Energy and other transmission providers and distribution providers' fast compliance with these directives were a significant contributor, as I mentioned, to restoring electric grid stability. Moving to the next slide. So the question often becomes, how did Austin Energy's generation portfolio perform? As you can see, Austin's generation exceeded the load in most instances, the load being the black line. As you can see, there is color above that black line. Austin Energy's generation resources were made available to ERCOT, and moreover, Austin Energy's renewable resources were measurable and impactful in not only assisting ERCOT meet demand, but while also assisting Austin Energy in terms of minimizing or mitigating our price volatility to the ERCOT price swings. And you can see the notation in red pointing to our load, and that's where it was curtailed started to get curtailed by ERCOT load shed directives. And I'll move to my last two slides. As Council Member Poole said, what's ahead? We recognize that we have improvement opportunities. And as a continuously learning organizations, one of the most visible improvement opportunities is our outage graph, and that is what's here today. While quantitatively, the outage graph did provide the big picture data, total outages, total incidents, total customers outaged, the more granular graphics could be improved such that customers, all customers, not just the vast majority, but all customers can graphically drill down to their service area and gain a better feedback as to the outage situation. And as you can see, this is just a snapshot in time. The outages were well dispersed across the whole service territory. And moving to my last slide, looking at considerations for improvement. Some of those considerations include we are reaching out to EPRI, that is an acronym for Electric Power Research Industry, to assist Austin Energy in our after-incident review. EPRI is one of the leading electrical power research arms in our industry. And we can't stop there. There's other technologies that we have to take a look at. Some of these technologies may be a potential candidate. Again, they will require further review. Smart distribution systems or smarter distribution systems or more inherent auto switching may be something worth considering. Expanded use of the AMI business case could be a potential, but there's many others. Our after actions review will bring many of those to light. In summary, we have continued work to do in the post-evaluation, and our responsibility includes working with all our stakeholders, policymakers, council members, customers, and industry regulators. With those concluding remarks, our Director of Communication, Ms. Marissa Monroy, will speak to our external communications, both before, during, and after the electric grid emergency. Marissa.
Sure. Are we going to ask questions after each segment before we get into the next topic?
Yeah, I think that would be useful, recognizing that we have just under we have about 25 minutes left for that. I did want to, let me fix that layout so I can see everybody. On the piece that Mr. Jackson just gave us with the graph that shows the precipitous drop of energy, the fast succession of the mandates to shed that came down in a tight time period, I think it was about an hour, and the fact that we were close to the entire system going black, that portion that we just now talked about. Does anybody have any specific questions that they would like to ask at this point? Yes, Councilmember Tovo.
I do, thanks. I have a series of questions, and I don't know whether we'll be able to talk about them all today, but I was wondering, and you may have this information on that graph, could you give us some sense of how much, throughout the emergency, how much Austin Energy was generating compared to what we were pulling off the grid? Do we have a slide that reflects that?
Can we pull up slide number 9, please?
Yeah, I wonder if this one might be showing us that.
You can see where our load was at any given time here, and then you can also see where our generation was. And in most cases, our generation was in excess of our load.
So in other words, our plants were generating more for the grid than Austin Energy customers were able to actually retrieve from the grid because of the mandated outages.
That's correct, with emphasis upon council member, as you said, due to mandatory load shed, our load was diminished.
On those two places where the dips are really significant, there's a significant gap between the load and our generation. Can you address those? And also, I guess, could you address more generally how Austin Energy, and you may not have all of this information yet, but because we have contracts and then we have our own plants, I'm very interested in the question of how we winterized our own plants, and also to what extent that's built into our contracts with other generation. And then could you address whether there were outages that account for those gaps between load and generation on this graph on 9?
Well, let me defer to our Vice President, but before I get to that, we do have those gaps, and oftentimes those gaps are given because we're providing ancillary service, spending reserve or some type of reserve. So it's somewhat misleading because we have generation that was perhaps not fully maxed out because we're providing reserve to the market. So there's a secondary subplot there. And can we open Mr. Vice President Pat Sweeney's in regard to winterization? And again, there's more coming on this. I think Pat can give you some very brief, high-level comments.
Mr. Jackson, before you turn it over to Mr. Sweeney, so that when you talk about the reserves, that some of our generation was being held in reserves, that's part of the 15% reserves grid-wise, the 15% of the reserves that the grid...
Yeah, I don't know about that specific threshold. Erica, can you, our Vice President, Erica Bierschbosch, can you address that, please?
I mean, just listening to I'm just trying to match this up with the hearings that are taking place at the state and the conversation about how much reserves are on hand at any one time. And it sounded like that threshold was 15%. And I'm trying to figure out if what you're saying is in those areas where there were gaps, some of our generation was going toward that reserve. I'm trying to figure out if we're talking about that same reserve.
Yes, generally speaking, ERCOT can change the amount of reserves depending on the season, but typically speaking, we have 5,000 megawatts of operating reserve. Erica, are you available to join? She needs to be moved over, moderator.
We can come back to that if you, I mean, in the interest of time, if you want to move on to Mr. Sweeney and circle back to Erica on that question.
Okay.
I believe that Ms. Bierschbach is here. Erica, can we hear you?
I think she just needs to turn her mic on. Why don't we move to Pat Sweeney then to answer Councilmember Tova's first question, and then if Ms. Bierschbach can get access, then we'll go to that.
Mr. Sweeney, the question was about winterization.
Good afternoon, council members. So all of our generators do go through a winterization process. So this is done in the fall leading up to winter. It's a prescribed activity by ERCOT. In fact, we report this into ERCOT, as do all generators, that it's completed. And from time to time, they do on-site inspections, but they're spot inspections. They don't inspect every single unit. So as we have in the past, we did complete our winterization processes, and they vary by the plant, the type of facility. So they're not all exactly the same, but the gist of them is the same, and that is to protect the units from the extreme cold or cold weather. And so that was done. That does not change the outcome that we and other generators did have issues from time to time with the extreme cold that we actually incurred. We're fortunate in that for the most part, our generators, while they did incur some issues with cold weather, and typically what these are for us and even more broadly are sensing or control lines that freeze up. These can contain moisture in them, and at certain temperatures, if those lines freeze up, they lose a connection to the control system. The control system says, I need to turn things off before they completely break. And they do that, and that's we experienced a bit of that, as did many other folks. Fortunately for us, we're able to turn back around those issues relatively quickly. Probably the biggest exception for us was the South Texas nuclear project. In similar issue there, but as a nuclear facility, they have a more extensive set of protocols that they have to follow before they can come all the way back up. And so they undertook their process that took a bit longer. But that's a short version that I can give you. If there's some follow-up, I can try and answer that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would be interested in a more in-depth look at that. And I saw that STP, that the South Texas was down for a bit. Do you have do you know what capacity our plants were operating at through the week, or is that information that you could provide us with after?
So I can't give you a kind of it's not an easy answer just to articulate here, but going back to Mr. Jackson's slide number 9, you get a sense of that. He did that slide number 9. I realize I don't think it's up in front of us here currently, but it does give you a sense of the overall output from the generators as it varied through the course of time, as was alluded to in the periods prior to the 15th, where you see some differences and dips there. Prices were lower, and so output dips accordingly. They're not needed. There's better opportunities in the market and so on. Some of that is, as was also referenced, what are called online or ancillary service reserves. That's where a generator is not fully loaded but can respond quickly, move up to events on the grid. Those are intentionally done by ERCOT to avoid or to address issues that occur in the short run. If the generator goes away, the others respond to it. So some of that's embedded in there as well. But ultimately, we can provide a breakdown of the individual generators over the same period and give that's just a different look than this one.
Also,
yeah,
Council,
I think that'd be interesting to see.
Regarding your 15% question, I believe you were speaking to planning reserve, and we can come back to you with more information on that. ERCOT does have a planning reserve margin, and it's a look-ahead plan margin based on some acceptable forecasts versus perhaps a daily operating reserve, which I quoted a number. Those are two different things, and we can come back to you at a later time with those details.
Okay, I'm going to move us on, take one more question at this point. Councilmember Alter.
Thank you. I wanted to talk about slide 9, so if you could put that up as well. So I appreciate Councilmember Tova's questions on the winterization and what we do with our own generation, and I think we need to understand that. Graphs and charts tell us stories. This chart tells one story. It doesn't tell us the full story, which I think your staff have acknowledged. This is, as I understand it, telling us the story of where our load was versus the fuel that we generated. And if I understood Mr. Sweeney correctly, there are times when we don't generate it ourselves because it's cheaper for us to get it elsewhere, and that wouldn't have been shown on here. And it is great to say that we performed well insofar as we were supplying power to ERCOT given our load shed, but this also seems to suggest that if we were going along at the load that we would have been without, we would not have had enough of our own generation to cover our needs and to be contributing into the system. And so I'd like to understand, more about the choices that were made about that generation and the forecast, because it doesn't look like we were prepared very well with our own generation resources for this, and those gaps were large. It's not at a time that we would have expected the cost to be very high. So can you speak a little bit more to that side of understanding what's going on here?
Mr. Jackson, if I could step in and answer that question. I apologize for not being available. I had some technical issues. This is Erica Bierschbach. I'm Vice President of Energy Market Operations. Councilmember Alter, we are typically long throughout the entire year. there are very few intervals that we are not long, therefore generation being able to surpass our load. What Mr. Sweetie mentioned was whenever it is less expensive to buy it from the market, we have that capacity in our stack. It's just happens to be that there's a cheaper fuel source on the market. In these situations, there was because of the winter event, the very, very extreme winter event that we went through, which caused a load shed, but also caused problems with generation in general. So not only were we receiving force majeure on solar facilities, turbines being derated or being shut in due to icing, as well as people's conventional generation having issues because of the storm event. It has less of an issue of not having the generation to meet our load as it does managing the consequences of, a storm that, was a very, very unusual event. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, Commissioner Alfaro. I'm happy to, answer it more properly if I haven't addressed what you're trying to understand.
I guess what I really wanted to point out was this chart is not telling the full picture, and that there is still a sense where our generation would not have met the task. Even if we didn't have the load shed, we would have been purchasing it at high prices, or we wouldn't have had the energy to meet the demand, even without the ERCOT load shed. And that is a problem that we have to address. And while we can say it's good that we met the needs of our load, that such as it was reduced, and that's better than happened in other markets, there's not clarity here that we would have been able to meet our need in absent of the ERCOT load shed. So, in some sense, we were still contributing to the need for the load shed in the first place because of the choices that we made, or because of failures at our generation plants. And I'm not sure what graphic and exactly what information shows us that. But this is a snapshot that doesn't fully show that broader picture. If we didn't have the ERCOT load shed situation, we would have to be buying elsewhere. And so in some sense, we contributed to that with the choices that we made in our preparation. I have a lot of questions about the February 11th to 14 section. I don't think we have time today to do those, so I will save those either for a future meeting or my individual meetings. But I did want to ask, this was the first that I heard that the storm hit Austin in a particular way that was different than elsewhere. Can you speak a little bit more to that? And you also said it hit the northwest part of your service territory more.
Yes, I'll just give you one reference point. Garland, for instance, spoke at the state legislature, and the chief operating officer there spoke of, we didn't have any storm damage as a result. So quite different than Austin. Again, that's just one topical one off the top of my head.
But does that mean that they didn't have storms, or that they didn't have damage to their lines? We know that we had a lot of places where we have vegetation management that is behind where we want it. And so we had damage. But when Garland says they didn't have storm damage, did they do a better job of maintaining their lines, or did they not have the ice storms that we had?
Listening to his testimony, I took away that he did not have the ice storms.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Okay, let's move on to, thanks everybody for the questions. And obviously there's way more that we could dig into, but it won't be today. Councilmember Kelly?
Yes, thank you. This will just be real quick. I was wondering if we might be able to put together a Q&A from staff with the questions that we have, if that might be a good idea.
Absolutely.
We don't have a lot of time.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is always an option. We're going to move into communications next. Councilmember Kassar. Did you have something?
Yeah, so y'all are in a presentation now on communications, and then we might have space for a question or two in there.
I'm not sure. I promised I'd turn this baton over at 2 o'clock to the water oversight folks. Okay, let's move quickly on to communications.
Good afternoon.
Thank you, Ms.
My name is
Monroy.
Marissa Monroy. Yes, good afternoon. My name is Marissa Monroy, and I am the Director of Communications for Austin Energy. And I want to begin by saying the Austin Energy Communications team continuously engaged with the community, stakeholders, the media, and mayor and council before, during, and after ERCOT issued energy emergency alerts. We know how our utility communicates during a crisis is just as important as how the incident is managed operationally. And so we work hard to understand the needs and demands of our stakeholders and the public so that we're able to deliver messages clearly and with credibility. So over the next couple of minutes, I'll make this quick, I promise, I will walk you through the communications the Austin Energy team provided throughout all of the events that unfolded between Thursday, February 11th and Sunday, February 21st. Let's begin with a look at our communications on Thursday, February 11th and Friday, February 12th. As we've noted, that initial ice storm came through that Friday afternoon, but ahead of that initial ice storm, our team worked through a number of different channels to let people know bad weather was on its way. We always want to help our customers through conservation and outage preparation messaging, but we know it's also important to let folks know what we're doing on our end as well. So we set our alarm clocks really early on those days. We provided live interviews to nearly every TV station in town. We responded to media requests about the number of crews we had in the field, energy conservation, and outage preparation. We shared social media messaging and updated our website. Next slide, please. This is a sampling of what that communication looked like during those early days. On the left, you'll see the news release we sent out to our 150 plus media partners. It's also important to note that we always make sure to include mayor and council staff on all of our news releases so that all of you are in the loop with the information we're providing. In the middle, social media messaging about how to prepare and report power outages. And on the right, just two of the many interviews we provided before that initial ice storm hit, these ones specific to CBS Austin and Telemundo Austin. Next slide, please. Once that initial storm rolled through Friday afternoon, we expanded our messaging to include outage restoration and messaging around the next incoming winter storm. We continued to provide the same communications we had provided before that initial ice storm, but in addition, we facilitated virtual news conferences that Saturday and Sunday. We provided mayor and council with key messaging about our current operations. We emailed all City of Austin utility customers a message about energy conservation. We also sent our key account customers what we call a news flash. That's an email encouraging them to conserve energy. And for those of you that may not be familiar with our key accounts customers, those are our customers who consume a significant amount of energy or have a complex electric service. And finally, we provided messaging to our partners at 311 and City of Austin Utilities call centers so that they could be prepared for the many questions we knew would come from the public. Next slide, please. On the left, our Chief Operating Officer provided virtual news conferences that Saturday and Sunday. On the right, you'll see one of our field crews. We know that the best way to tell our story is when it comes from the folks working in the elements. That last image is a snapshot taken from a video we put together of our crews working in icy conditions. This particular field crew likened his experience of trying to open icy equipment to that of opening up a car door that had been iced over. It takes a little more force. So throughout our communications, as difficult as it was, we really did our best to put things in the simplest terms possible for the public to understand what was going on. And this video is one example of that. Next slide, please. Just after midnight on Sunday, ERCOT issued its first EEA, or Energy Emergency Alert. Austin Energy staff practices for EEAs every year. Our team has communication templates ready to go. And that's why it took us less than 30 minutes to knock out every single communication bulleted below each EEA. And EEA 3 is what triggers rotating outages. So when ERCOT issued it, we knew we had to go beyond our normal communication channels. And we did so using the communication channels bolded on the side. They included an email to all of you and working with our partners at Homeland Security and Emergency Management to issue a Warn Central Texas alert in both English and Spanish. A quick note about that Warn Central Texas alert, as it's one of several proactive tools the city uses and used to reach out to people throughout this event. It's a regional emergency notification system orchestrated through the Capital Area Council of Governments, registering with Warn Central Texas of local officials to contact their communities by phone, email, or text during times of disasters or public safety events. It's important to also note people must register to receive these alerts. Next slide, please. Just 2 minutes after ERCOT issued that EEA 3, we shared that information on our social media pages. In the middle, you'll see a look at the Warn Central Texas message that was sent out, both in English and in Spanish. And on the right is the email we sent ahead of all of the EEAs to all City of Austin utility customers, telling them to prepare for the extreme weather. And I just want to once again emphasize that this is a snapshot of what we provided and not all inclusive. Next slide, please. As soon as Austin Energy staff realized these outages would extend longer than any of us imagined, we started to get the word out and explain as best as we could, given the limited details Austin Energy staff had, what was happening. As the winter storm lingered and the events evolved, so did our messaging. We focused on energy conservation, critical load circuits, billing questions, and sadly, scam awareness. We shared as many details as we had available to us using the same communication channels we had been relying on. We participated in those daily news conferences that week with the Austin Travis County leadership and answered media questions there and through the media requests we received. We kept in touch with our customers through emails about conservation and outage updates. And one bullet point I'd like to highlight in this list is the more than 500 social media messages we provided this week. We understand not everyone is on social media, which is why we worked through other communication channels. But we were absolutely getting inundated with questions from the community specific to individual situations through our social media platforms. We also provided a special "Here's what you need to know about our outage situation" webpage. We knew that website would be crucial in giving everyone, whether it was all of you, the media, the public, 311, everyone, a place to come back to on this dynamic situation. And throughout the week, we provided update after update after update right there on the front page of austinenergy.com. We also knew our outage map was getting a ton of clicks, so we made sure to include updates there as well. Next slide, please. On the left, you'll see that webpage we updated throughout the week, which provided key information about what was happening. On the right, a glimpse of what we call one of our rotating banners. This one specifically links to information about Austin Energy bills, which was and continues to be a hot topic. Of course, the other place folks might go to look for information is our coautilities.com webpage. That's where people go to pay their bills. So we made sure to update content there as well, shown in the image at the bottom. Next slide, please. In our social media messaging, we continued to use photos and videos as much as we could to explain this challenging situation. We used infographics where we could to kind of make this information more digestible. This is an infographic about how we restore power. And finally, next slide, please. And finally, a look at the communications we shared with all of you. I'd really like to take this time to thank each and every one of you for helping us amplify our messaging directly to your constituents. Thank you for taking the time to read through our memos, which you'll see there on the left. And we've sent emails throughout this event. Thank you for retweeting or sharing our social media messaging. So many of you also share our talking points about energy conservation in your newsletters to constituents. Some of you invited us to talk about what was happening on your own messaging channels, as was the case with Councilmember Harper Madison's Facebook Live event right there in the center. That's our Chief of Staff in that orange hat just to her left, our right, ready to answer questions. I have no doubt that having all of you share our messaging throughout this event helped people find safety, comfort, and help. And we look forward to working with all of you in the future as we continue to take a closer look at the events that unfolded during the storm. I'll turn it back over to you, Councilmember Fuller.
Thank you, Ms. Monroy. That's really good. Somebody needs to mute. I'll just point out a couple of things in the last couple of minutes. If you don't have any power, it's not going to be possible to read the social media or to watch the TV. So one of the things I hope to talk with you guys about and get more information about is what other ways can we imagine to get information out if we don't have power. There's a time lag in updating the outage map, and there's also not a general familiarity of the public on where to find the outage map or what is on it or what it means. So I think where to find information in that. So a lot of information was absolutely provided by Austin Energy, and I think going forward in our additional conversations, we can dig into what can we do with Austin Energy as a council and in our community to increase people's familiarity and facility with the various forms of information, the type of information that you guys were providing, so we're better equipped next time. Does anybody have any questions in the remaining? I did want to talk about what relief programs Austin Energy was providing, and maybe we'll be able to slip that in. Yes, Councilmember Renteria.
Thank you. I was one of the ones that didn't have any power from Monday to Thursday, and there was no way that I could get any communication because I didn't have internet. There was no power. The only thing I got was this little transistor radio was the only way that I could get any information, and that was through KUT and some of the other stations when they do have their news time set. And that was the only way that I could figure out what was going on. And then y'all guys promoted that it was going to be a rolling blackout. That never happened, so people stayed. The next day, y'all said that it was going to be back on Tuesday. That never happened. And everybody was looking at the street where I live at, across 35, and see downtown flashing lights all over the place. We need to do a better job. I mean, it was so ridiculous to think that people were going to have an ability to go out and communicate with anybody. I had to go and path to my car so I could get in there and charge up my battery on my phone just to communicate. So we really need to sit down there and really take a hard look at this and how y'all really communicate, because you cannot expect to have some districts like Alta there had 40% of their people out without electricity. They're not going to communicate with you because they can't get online. You know, we require a lot of energy and electricity to be able to communicate, especially through the internet. You can post whatever you want out there on the internet. We're not going to see it. So,
really good point. Thank you, Councilmember Renteria. Austin Energy staff, do we have time to run through the relief programs? And I see Councilmember Kassar raised his hand. Yes, Councilmember Kassar.
Yeah, just briefly, I want to reiterate Councilmember Renteria's point, just to put a pin in it, that one, if figuring out how we could communicate to people that they weren't going to roll, I think is one thing. And then second, how we could communicate earlier in the day that you're likely not going to get your power back so that people could make decisions, because so often it was at night that people were starting to realize that, and then we were telling them not to drive. And so I think those are just important things for us to mark. And then the last bit, which I think might be for the first presentation, and I don't think I heard it brought up, but just if we could get some level of report back about how we could better get to rolling blackouts if we are asked to shed that much power in the future, whether that's better sectionalizing our circuits or the smart meter issues that have been raised. I think that'd be really helpful, because again, you wouldn't have to communicate so much that you're not going to get your power back if we can make changes that could get us to rolling, even if that much load is cut. So I just want to raise those before it escapes us.
That's a good point, and we'll be digging into that later. I mean, at hopefully the next meeting. Is there anybody who hasn't asked a question, who would like to ask a question? I want to go into the relief programs, if not. Who's got the relief? Is it Ms. Cooper?
Mr. Overton is going to
give Mr. Overton. Okay. Mr. Overton.
Yes. This is Carrie Overton, Chief Customer Officer. And council members, we certainly understand that this is just the beginning. And so I know we have a lot going in a short period of time. We will continue to make ourselves available to answer those additional questions from you and from the community. As I stated, we certainly recognize the hardship presented by the storms and the impact that they've had on our communities. Others have already shared the gravity of the events, but to let you know that we are continuing to work with you and the community to make improvements from lessons learned and provide as much relief as possible. Is the slide up? Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. One of the things that became apparently that we were aware of was that many customers had been concerned about outside reports of large bill spikes due to variable price contracts. AE provides stable and affordable rates to our customers. Our electric utility rates are fixed, and changes to those rates can only happen and must be authorized by the City Council. So we wanted to share that information out to the community to make sure that there was some level of calm in terms of what they were hearing. In addition to that, our customers will only be charged for electricity that they actually consume. You'll hear later in the Austin Water report that we're working with them, and they're going to bring forth another set of additional relief measures, rate relief measures, to minimize the impact of the storm and the impact that they will have on our customer bills. And last week, Council, you've already approved the suspension of all of the COA utility late fees, and coming forth tomorrow are provisions associated with the waiving of the $20 service initiation fee for impacted customers, residential customers, and a $10 bill credit for Austin Energy residential customers as an offset to the customer service charge. In addition to that, as part of the bill relief efforts, we've expanded the definition of the hardship to include customers impacted by the storms to the +1 additional monies. As you're aware, Austin Water and Austin Energy provide an additional $10 million to the bill relief efforts associated with COVID-19. We also are making those provisions through the hardship of the storm available for our customers as well. Next slide. So I'll just summarize this very briefly. We're available to answer any questions you may have, but this is how customers can actually reach us. They certainly can call us at any of the numbers that are listed there on the slide. They can continue to contact us through the austinbillhelp.com. We specifically have agents and a third-party representative represented there to take any information that customers need. We also have our coautilities.com website available to provide information to our customers. I will note in this slide, we missed the utilities is a misspell right there. It's coautilities.com. So we'll send the slide corrected, so the hyperlink will send you to the right place. And we also will be available for customers who need to see us in person that don't have access to computers or the internet. They can also visit with us directly at our North Austin Utility Customer Service Center, and the address is listed here as well. Again, we'll stay available. They can always call us, and our main utility contact center is the 512-494-9400 number, 512-494-9400. And we'll continue to bring other updates in terms of bill relief in the days to come.
This is great. Thank you so much, Mr. Overton. I did promise that I would land this plane by 2 p.m. We are a little bit over. I appreciate the generosity of the Austin Water Utility Oversight folks to let us use some of their time today. I know that this raises lots of questions, and that was a major intention of this meeting, was to start centering us in our council discussions on what happened, how things are, and how we're going to improve our processes throughout. And it will be a continuation of a discussion. And thanks again, everybody, for being here for this now. I hope you'll stay and listen to the presentation from our water utility staff. And then when you have a free millisecond, do please look at the reading list and all the links that were part of the message board post. Gives you a really good flavor of what happened from some pretty smart people with regard to the energy regulatory structure in our state and the piece that Austin was in that 12-day period. So thanks very much, and I will adjourn the Austin Energy portion of our joint session.
Thank you, Councilmember